Yo, how's it going? So, what were drugs like in ancient Greece and Rome? I mean, based off their mythology and like everything that went on, I'm pretty sure there were strong drugs. They're pretty
Like
strong
Pablo
drugs.
Escobar and Griselda Blanco are known for revolutionizing the international drug trade. But if one wants to know who invented this trade, they would have to travel thousands of years back in time. Traces of drug trades between various early civilizations can be found as far back as 1600 BC. Welcome to Nutty History, and let's find out what ancient narcos were like in Greek and Roman civilization.
Let's go. The mystical fungus. Yeah, man.
The taboo around mentioning recreational drugs is nothing new in history. That's why there's not a lot of mention of this in ancient records, and those mentions are only a few. One will find historical mention of drugs mostly in medicinal and religious contexts. But what about for recreational purposes? Now, that doesn't mean ancients were not a fan of being high as a kite, because there were more than a dozen ways to alternate reality for oneself. Thanks to advancements in archaeology, translation, and science in the last 2 decades, there is insight available on what drug abuse would have been like in ancient civilizations. The two drugs that stood out in the drug trade in ancient Greece and Rome were opium and cannabis. But at home, ergot was a drug of its own kind. The
Ergot.
fungus called ergot has played a surprisingly stealthy but substantial
Man, this plant looks weird.
role in the Salem witch trials, the French Revolution, and the Dancing Plague. Even back in ancient Greece, as far as 1600 BC, it is believed that a cult called Demeter and Persephone used ergot to induce visions. The goal was to awaken the Eleusinian mysteries. They convened at Eleusis in ancient Greece every year to perform secret religious rites at descending to Hades before returning to the living world and reuniting with Demeter, her mother and the goddess of fertility. To attain the Eleusinian mysterious, one was required to consume kykeon, a hallucinogenic beverage. Drinking ergot-laced kykeon was described as a spiritual progression, and they believed it unlocked the experience of death and rebirth. It's hard to conclude if ergot from
Sounds like
locally grown
DMT.
barley was the active psychotropic ingredient in kykeon or not, but some historians point to it as a possibility for its vision-inducing qualities.
Not really poppy.
There's a reason the term poppy appears a lot in fantasy novels written in modern times concerning medicinal and recreational usage. For ancient Romans and Greeks, it was certainly more than just a pretty plant, and it was perfectly legal. One can observe its prevalent use as a motif on statues and engravings to see how common poppy was popped by the population of Rome and Greece. See what I did there? Archaeologists have discovered that as early as 1600 BC, the ancient world was constructing small flasks in the shape of poppy capsules, that is, the bulging ball under the flower's petal that yields opium. It's not hard to guess why these flasks were made in such peculiar shape and what their function was, but thanks to forensic analysis, the residuals in excavated capsules have confirmed that these flasks were meant to carry not only opium, but a variety of psychoactive substances. Excavations have revealed that these jars and capsules were found throughout the Levant, Egypt, and the Middle East. The uniformity in design confirms that these were mass-produced under organized manufacturing units. It's believed that opium must have arrived in ancient Egypt through Mesopotamia and Egypt. Egypt was quite big on opium cultivation, and a number of varieties of Egyptian opium were available in ancient Greece. In the classical era, the extract of the plant was known as opium thebaicum, after the city of Wasit, which the Greeks knew as Thebes. Another version, Opium cyrenaicaum, was a slightly different version of the plant that happened to grow to the west in Libya. Apart from importing a lot of opium, ancient Greeks grew their own as well. Dioscorides wrote about the opium harvesting technique in detail. He suggested that to make opium, farmers must wait until the dew has dried away to cut lightly with a knife around the top of the plant. They must take care not to cut the inside. Instead, cut straight down on the outside of the capsule. When fluid comes out, wipe it with a finger onto a spoon. Upon returning, one can harvest more of the residue after it has thickened, and yet more the following day. With the
Damn, dude, they were specific about the way they handled their opium.
Romans, the usage of opium saw evolution.
Surgical.
Citizens of Rome used opium-made Cretic wine as a sleep aid. For good times, they consumed meconium, a drink made of poppy leaves which could be considered as a watered-down version of the drug. Moreover, opium was not just legal, but easily accessible on the streets of Rome. It could be purchased as small tablets in specialist stalls in most marketplaces. Who says the past wasn't progressive?
Yo, for real. But not everything. Oh, snap. Okay.
Just
Talk
like
to me.
today, back in ancient Greece and Rome, while some drugs in controlled use were legal, several drugs were actually illegal. In Capua, for example, drug sellers were found in a notorious area called Seplacia. The place had such a bad reputation that Seplacia became a synonym for mind-altering drugs, perfumes, and ointments. Drugs that were commonly found in such black markets were quite exotic and powerful. Dead nightshade was so trippy that it was often associated with pseudo-arts of magic and potion making. Some credit about relating deadly nightshade with mystical powers goes to the poet Ovid, who associated the herb with witches and warlocks in his poems. The reason this drug was not easily accessible was that even a slight excess of dosage could cause death. But if consumed in precise amounts, deadly nightshade was potent enough to cause hallucinations for days. Henbane
Holy
was another
shit.
drug that was notorious as a magical herb. No wonder it has another name, stinking nightshade, making it a little off-putting cousin of a deadly nightshade. It was commonly used as a medicinal drug rather than recreational. Henbane was the supplementary drug that serious junkies would consume along with a cocktail of an hallucinogenic to imitate the feeling of being drunk. The drug was
Wow.
consumed by both inhaling it and ingestion.
Jesus.
Mad honey is a specific honey that is extracted from rhododendron flowers. The people of ancient Anatolia were the first to discover that neurotoxins in this specific honey caused altered consciousness, delirium, and nausea. One of the earliest accounts of mad honey comes from the Greek historian, philosopher, and commander Xenophon of Athens. In his chronicle, the Anabasis, he wrote that his army was traveling along the shores of the Black Sea in 401 BC when they decided to feast on some local honey. A few hours later, they became disoriented and began vomiting and had diarrhea. Now, in any
Oh
case,
my God,
this would
that's
have
such a
resulted
bad
in a plague.
day.
But to their surprise, the next day, the whole army was fine and they traveled back home to Greece. Unfortunately, the Roman army of Pompey the Great wasn't as lucky.
I mean, just imagine, like, you over here just taking some honey. Next thing you know, you're over here having diarrhea, vomiting, and all these sources. Like, ugh. I'd never eat honey again.
In
What
67
happened?
BC. During Pompey's invasion of the Black Sea region, his army got tempted by the mad honey's honeycombs strategically placed on the route by the locals. While 1,000 Roman soldiers feasted and got high on toxic honey, King Mithridates made short work of Pompey's invasion and sent them back home with their tails between their legs.
That is a true genius of war. Holy shit. Yeah, no one expects honey, man. No one expects honey.
As we mentioned earlier, drugs are often skipped in the existing historical records and literature from ancient Greece and Rome. However, there are rare cases when they are not only mentioned but also acted as an important element in the plot. Homer was specifically liberal about the depiction of drugs in the Odyssey. In one instance, he narrated how Helen of Troy liked to dope her wine with a happy drug that can take away her painful memories and bite of anger. Now, according to Homer, this drug was so potent that under its effect, one wouldn't feel any sort of sorrow, guilt, or remorse. Even if their family was murdered in front of them, one would still be calm and happy under the effect of this drug. There were also
fuck
drugs
is
that
that?
could be considered ancient performance enhancers. Performance enhancers have always been in demand among males throughout history. In Homer's The Odyssey, Odysseus had to drag his crew away from the land of the lotus eaters. There were no ordinary lotuses, but a specific breed called blue lotus. The psychoactive alkaloid in blue lotuses causes mild euphoria and tranquility combined with an increased libido. A perfect combination for having a great time in bed. No wonder those sailors were not happy about their king leading them away from such land. Interestingly, hemp was used as narcotics long before opium in Europe. The mysterious Yamnaya people of Central Asia brought it to Europe with them, and the plant has been in Northern and Central Europe for over 5,000 years. Hemp ropes and fabrics are used even to this day, but archaeologists also found braziers with burned cannabis, which shows that early Greeks were smoking hemp happily. The Greek physician Dioscorides was perhaps not so approving of cannabis and found it rather hampering when it comes to a consumer's sex life. He even recommended cannabis to reduce sexual desires for those who could not control their urges in inappropriate times. Roman philosopher
Interesting.
Pliny the Elder called cannabis the laughing weed and suggested it as a toxifying ingredient for the wine on special occasions.
Hmm.
Romans were actually quite fond of cannabis and called it the merriment supplement to make parties and social gatherings more fun. And if we are to believe Herodotus, Greeks didn't disagree about it either.
Drugs are bad, kids.
Despite being very liberal about abusing narcotics, Greeks and Romans were also aware of their adverse effects. They knew very well what could happen in cases of overdosing, especially in the case of drugs like deadly nightshade. Dioscorides warned very bluntly in his writings that drugs will kill you if done excessively. However, there is another side to this story. Killing oneself was more accepted and normal back in those days. People would buy drugs specifically for these reasons. While opium was commonly used as sleeping pills, people would also mix poppy juice with hemlock to have an
No.
eternal sleep and never wake up again.
Oh
That
my
does put the
God.
whole free drug market scenario in a bad light, don't you think? Tell us in the comments, what do you think about Greek?
Yeah, man, like holy shit, like cannabis was used throughout the whole ancient world. And then for some reason, 60, 70 years ago, we just kind of demonized that out of nowhere. It's over the time. Like, uh, it's such a weird, we have a weird society, weird way of looking at things these days. But luckily, it's changing. So there's that to look forward to.